Hello, welcome to the 2024-2025 Veteran Legality Official course. You received an invitation to take this webinar instead of the full certification course based on your last year's test scores, as well as your tenured experience as a USASF legality official. This course will not cover the rules in depth, but instead will take a look at any changes, modifications, updates, as well as considerations for the season as we move into the new year. A few course highlights for you to be aware of. We'll be covering our elite tier changes, our prep tier expansion and changes, glossary updates, age grid document changes, as well as season considerations. Let's take a look at our elite tier changes first. So when we look at our tiny and mini column, if you'll jump down to 2CII, right underneath that you'll see in red, mini follows youth and junior rule 2C. This is actually not a change to the rules. It's just a fix that we noticed last year in the rules. Our allowance of hip overhead rotation skills that are airborne with hand support for minis only was down underneath D. And that actually covers airborne skills without hand support. So we moved that skill up to where it belonged. And then also notice that really minis are just following our youth and junior rules. So the rule itself has not changed. It's just the location of that rule and how it was worded within the rules themselves. Let's move over to youth and junior. So you'll see on rule number 1, that palms and props have been added. That's also the same for senior and open. That's just for consistency throughout the rule. Again, not a change in the intent of the rule itself. Bouncing back to youth and junior, when we move down to rule number 2, 2DII, airborne skills without hand support are allowed provided they only connect to one hip overhead rotation skill with hand support. Clarification, skills are limited to 2 consecutive hip overhead rotation skills. So this is actually an update because what dancers were allowed to do previously was a cartwheel into a tuck. And that's not really the proper progression the dancers should be working with. So now they will be allowed to use that airborne hip overhead rotation skill. Another addition to this rule is 2E. Airborne hip overhead rotation skills without hand support over another dancer may not have a blind landing. We'll take a look at that definition in the glossary a little bit later in this webinar. However, what we're looking at here is that airborne hip overhead rotation skills without hand support over another dancer may not have a blind landing. So you're watching for a dancer tumbling over another dancer without hand support in a way where they're not able to see the performance surface as they're landing. All right, so moving on to our prep tier, and we're looking at executed by individuals first. This is a lot of red. I know you all are aware that red means changes to the rules. Some of these rules are the same as they were across for prep previously, and some are tiered a little bit more like our elite tier rules are, with a staggering and progression. So we'll take a look at each one and make a note within your own rules which are actual changes and which are not changes to the rules. We're very, very excited about opening up these prep rules to help facilitate our teams using novice and prep in a way that supports our program more. So I know it's a little bit more work on you guys. I hope to be there to be able to support you. Again, you can text throughout the weekend. I'll provide my phone number at the end of the course, but I think we'll get through it together. So we're looking at youth prep, inverted skills. Non-airborne skills must involve hand support with at least one hand throughout the skill. So we're used to seeing that. Airborne skills with or without hand support are not allowed. Clarification, kip up with hand support originating from the performance surface is allowed, but the dancer may not hold palms or props in the supporting hands. So that's also familiar. And then C, inverted skills with hand support are not allowed while holding palms or props in the supporting hands. And when we move over to junior and senior inverted skills, A, airborne skills with or without hand support are not allowed. A kip up with hand support originating from the performance surface is allowed, but the dancer may not hold palms or props in the supporting hands. And B, inverted skills with hand support are not allowed while holding palms or props in the supporting hands. So nothing real groundbreaking there. Just review those slight differences between tiny and mini, and then youth, and then junior and senior. You should also make a note, because there is not an open option for our prep dancers, these are segmented a little bit different. So that far left column is tiny and mini, the center column is youth, and then that far right column is junior and senior. So let's move on to rule number 2. This is our hip overhead rotation rule. So we're looking at youth. Skills with hip overhead rotation. A, non-airborne skills with hand support are not allowed while holding palms or props in the supporting hands. The exception, forward rolls and backward rolls. We know we see this rule across all of our tiers, all of our divisions. So when you look over at junior and senior prep, it is the same rule 2A. Moving on to 2B. Non-airborne skills are limited to 2 consecutive skills. That is the same for junior and senior. Rule 2C. Airborne skills with or without hand support are not allowed. An exception, a round-off that is not connected to any other skill with hip overhead rotation. So that is not a clarification or an exception that a skill that is not airborne in the approach but is airborne in the descent, it's not fully encompassing that way. Only a round-off is allowed, and that is to work that progression, hopefully moving into the next phase of their dance. And then D, under youth, airborne skills with or without hand support over another dancer are not allowed. That is the same as tiny mini prep. So moving over to junior and senior, we said A was the same, B was the same, C is where we diverge a little bit. So airborne skills with hand support are allowed provided. So now we can do airborne skills with hand support outside of a round-off, as long as they're limited to 2 consecutive hip overhead rotation skills, airborne or non-airborne. CII, they are not airborne in the approach, but may be airborne in the descent. So clarification, in the approach, the hands must touch the ground before the feet leave the ground. So now we're looking at that broadened sense of the rule. So youth is limited to just that round-off. Now junior and senior, as long as they are not airborne in the approach, but can be airborne in the descent, it would be legal. So we're looking at something like a front handspring. D, airborne skills without hand support are not allowed. We do have an exception here, an aerial cartwheel. And E, airborne skills with or without hand support over another dancer are not allowed. So we've seen that one before. Let's move on to our groups and pairs rules. So we've got some red here. Looking at number 1, across tiny mini youth, junior and senior, we added the exception that you also see in the elite tier, that leaps and jumps of connected dancers are allowed. That is the only addition or change to the tiny and minis. When we look at youth, let's move down to that vertical inversion, rule number 4. The executing dancer may be inverted in an elevated skill provided the following. So we all remember that prior to this year, this season, dancers may not have been elevated from the performance surface in an inverted skill. Now we're opening that up a little bit. So when we're looking at our youth dancers, they may be inverted in an elevated skill as long as contact between the executing dancer and at least one supporting dancer is maintained until the executing dancer returns to the performance surface or returns to the upright position, and that the height of the executing dancer's shoulders does not exceed hip level. So those words, that phrasing, all comes from our elite tier. So you should be familiar with those at this point. Then when we move down our youth column, dismounts are allowed provided at the highest point of the dismount, The executing dancer's hips do not elevate above shoulder level, and the executing dancer must land on their foot or feet. The executing dancer's hips do not cross the vertical axis while airborne and inverted. Clarification here, dancer is free of contact from both the performance surface and other performers. And C, the executing dancer is not inverted when released. So again, last season across the board, a release or a dismount was not allowed in our prep tier. Now with youth, it's opened up a little bit, and then obviously you can see with junior and senior, it is also opened up a little bit. So junior and senior is the same as youth for our vertical inversion, rule number 4. However, the height of the executing dancer's shoulders do not exceed shoulder level versus hip level. So if you take a look between those two, B is the real difference in those rules. Youth is hip level. Junior and senior is shoulder level. All right, when we move down to dismounts for junior and senior, it is the exact same as youth. So both of those are at shoulder level. All right, moving along to our technical skill rules. Again, these have opened up a little bit. We have tiny, mini, and youth together, and then junior and senior together. However, we do have a youth exception. That's that first red that we see there. So when you look at our technical skill rule number 2, leaps and jumps are allowed provided the following. That number 2A is the youth exception. So leaps and jumps that release the head toward the back while airborne are not allowed. For example, sea jump, firebird, or ring leap. So youth may do that because when we look over to junior and senior, they are now allowed to release their head back. Okay, moving down to our stationary turns, rule number 3. We have another exception for youth. The working leg is held in a pencil, passe, or coupe position. Rotations are limited to 2. The exception, youth teams may perform a single leg hold turn. Youth teams may perform 2 a la seconde or fouette turns only. So they still, if you look back up to number 1, are only allowed to do 2 consecutive skills. I foresee this one being one that we may see a lot this year. So make note of it if you do. It's difficult to just do 2 fouettes or 2 a la seconde turns. Usually there needs to be another rotation or a pirouette into or out of that. So I think we're going to see people who get excited that it's opened up a little bit, but don't realize that that pirouette is an additional connected or consecutive turn or skill. So make a note of that when you submit your legality tracking so that we can keep an eye on that throughout the season. And then B, axle turns are not allowed. When we move over to junior and senior, rule number 1, connected and consecutive technical skills executed without a step, pause, or break in between are limited to 3. So now junior and seniors can do 3 connected or consecutive skills, meaning they can do a triple turn now. They can do skills without a pause, stop, in between that are 3 skills long. When we look at 2A, leaps and jumps that release the head toward the back while airborne are allowed. Example, sea jump, firebird, or ring leap. And we know youth also follows that rule. And then looking at stationary turns, because we opened up connected or consecutive skills to 3 under rule number 1, we have also now done that with our stationary turn rule. So rotations are limited to 3. Clarification, this is also an addition. The leg may be held in any position, waist height or lower. So now we're not prescribing a pencil, a coupe, or a passe. They may hold an extension out to the front, an attitude. So they have many more options here. And those are the only changes both to our prep and our novice technical skills. Let's take a look at our glossary updates. Blind landing is an addition. This is a landing in which a dancer does not have the opportunity to see the ground when landing an airborne hip overhead rotation skill. Number 2, hip overhead rotation executed by individuals We know this was in the glossary already. This is an update to the definition to better help support you while you are judging at events. So make sure that you take a look both at number 2 and number 3. And I would encourage you to go back and compare to what they looked like in last year's glossary so you're aware of those changes. But to read to you, an action characterized by continuous movement through the vertical axis where an individual's hips pass through the inverted position in a tumbling skill. And then our examples, back walkover or cartwheel. And then number 3, this is with groups or pairs, an action characterized by continuous movement through the vertical axis where an individual's hips pass through the inverted position in a lift or partnering skill. So what we were seeing were skills where the hips were not going directly over the head, but for all intents and purposes, it was a hip over head rotation skill. So this changing in verbiage will allow us to look at some of those skills that were gray in a more clear way. Okay, so go back and compare last year's glossary terms to this year's, just so that you understand that subtle difference. And again, reach out at any time. Send me videos if you're at an event and you have a question about it. Okay, number 4 and 5, spotter. So this is an update in the glossary. A dancer not physically involved in a lift or skill whose proximity and attention to the execution of the choreography allows them to provide support and safety to the executing dancer as needed. So through our training, we all understood what a spotter was. However, it was not clearly stated, and that didn't help support our members. So it's no change to what a spotter is as far as how we understand it on the dance side. It's just now clearly written so that if you need to talk to a coach, you can go back to the glossary to refer. And then number 5, kick. One foot lifts from the floor with force to the waist or higher while the other foot remains on the floor. This was an addition that helps support a change to the description of the category. So it's not something that really impacts you guys, but I wanted to draw awareness to it as an update. Moving on to our age grid updates. So please, 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 when you're at an event, make a note if dancers are not in the right division or category. Talk to your EP as soon as possible. Don't wait for the dance to finish. Try to flag them down if you can, because they may have to make moves and adjust where they are, or maybe there's just a hole that you are unaware of. So please take note of divisions and categories as you move through your schedules while you're at an event. What we're looking at here, co-ed. Both male and female dancers must perform in order for a routine to be considered co-ed. Dancers who make up a co-ed composition must be rostered and take the competition floor. So what happened was we had a team or more than one team roster as co-ed, but their non-female dancer was not a dancer who was performing. So then the team is actually not co-ed when they compete. So to clarify that or to clean that up, in order for them to be considered co-ed, there must be a male dancer performing with the team. So if you see an all-female dance in a co-ed division, immediately talk to the event producer, because they're also aware of this change and they should know that a male dancer should be on the performance surface. I also need to be aware of that. So please let me know if you encounter that situation. And then the other red thing here, if you look down at open team size, there is no longer open small and open large. This is both domestically at our regular event producer events and also at Worlds next year. So there is only open, no elite and premier is how they were designated previously. So there should be 6 or more dancers up to 30. And that is all of open. Okay, those are the 2 main ones for you to consider or to think about while you're at an event. And then let's move on to our season considerations. So there are additional tracking items that I would like you to make sure that you upload or include in your tracking information. Please be timely in when you submit those. There are some events that I'd like to follow up with almost immediately this season. So please get your information in as soon as possible. These additional tracking items are the performance order for the event. This can be just photos that you attach and upload. You can scan them. You can upload them to a file and attach the file link, whatever works for you. It doesn't need to be standardized right now, but I would like to see the performance orders. And then also, we're asking within your submission form that you fill out, what is the flooring like at your event? Are the dancers on stage dancing on vinyl or another surface like a bonded foam, bonded carpet? And then if you're able to get into the warm-up room, especially as veterans, I'd really, really like you to take a moment to step back there so that you can relay to me what the vinyl flooring situation is at those events as well. There are new standard guidelines for our sanctioning, and those include flooring with a mandate toward vinyl flooring with a few exceptions. So if you can collect that information, it'll help us inform decisions moving forward with those sanctioning guidelines as well. Please review the routine stoppage information. Most importantly to me at this time is that we don't allow dancers to become exposed on stage. There is now strongly worded verbiage within our routine stoppage information that it kind of discusses child pornography, that if a child were on stage and their top came down or we saw a little bit too much cheek, whatever it is, there's now an issue because people are filming, they're taking pictures, and it's totally innocent. It still counts as pornography. So announcements have to be made throughout the venue saying everyone must delete photos, must delete videos. It just becomes a much larger issue. So yes, you may stop it for injury, for flooring issues, and most importantly, to protect those athletes. So take a look at our routine stoppage verbiage and how that's been updated. As veterans, I really am encouraging you to make sure that you're reporting concerning trends. Anything that makes you kind of stop and question what you're looking at. What is that I just saw? It's a little scary to me. It helps inform how we move forward as a rules committee. Last year, we didn't really have any submissions, so it doesn't mean we need them. Don't look for them, right? Our philosophy is that we're there when needed, not searching for these issues. But this is your opportunity to share that information. So make sure you add that as needed. I also wanted to clarify when there are exceptions that say something like exception, aerial cartwheels are allowed. Front aerial is allowed. This means without variation. So it's not a Tensica, right, where they're twisting their body. It's not a Barani, where an aerial lands with 2 feet instead of 1 foot and then the other. If you look at the definition of these terms, they're very clear in stating emulates a cartwheel, emulates a front walkover. So that is from the beginning to the end. They just don't have hand support. So if you see any of those variations, say a front aerial landing down on the ground, those are illegal, and we need to educate the coaches that they are illegal. So we are sticking specifically to the definition of those items with no variations allowed within. And then communication at events. Just text my phone number. Please do not give this phone number out to anyone. This is not to be distributed. If someone needs to get in touch with me, they can email me, and I'll provide my email address at the end. This is only for you guys to use. So my phone number, and text me. I will probably not pick up a call from a number I don't recognize. 703-606-0636. And our final thoughts. So you will still be required for a background check and your sexual abuse awareness training. This will be emailed after completing the course and test. Andre should be emailing you all to tell you what you need to update, what you need to have within your profiles. You must use your profiles this season to set yourself up for events. So please go in there, familiarize yourself. Let me know if you have questions. This also helps tracking sanctioning for our event producers. So we're making sure that they have a legality official at events that require them. And if you are not in your profile, then it's not connecting and letting us know that information. So please, please, please set up your profile accordingly. Any costuming or music concerns, do not act alone. discuss with your panel, the event producer, with me. And finally, palms down and airborne hip overhead rotation skills. So last year, I think we did a really good job of tightening that up. When discussions were had on the international level with our non-US friends, it was decided that we're not going to prohibit the use of hands-free palms. We're just going to continue to educate and to clarify. And I really want to help support you guys within that. Watching for hands-free palms should not be your main concern at an event. It should not eat up all your time. So, hands-free palms are allowed. There will be further communication from me to the event producer about how they can better track and collect that information from their attendees, from their customers. If you are uncertain, warn. If you're taking 5 minutes, more than 5 minutes to determine whether they had palms being used the right way or not, warn them and let them know if it is not clear next time, it will be a deduction. And teams will be warned prior to that about clarity in their use of hands-free palms. So thank you for joining me for this brief webinar. Again, there weren't a lot of updates, but with prep opening up so much, I really wanted to make sure everybody had eyes on, that we're all on the same page. And then some of those things as veteran judges, I want you to be leaders with and to step into this season with the knowledge of, so that we're not playing catch up on the back end. You can see my email address here, smbate@usasf.net. Please never, ever hesitate to email, to reach out to me. After you complete this webinar, you will be taken to our test link. Within that test link, you will be asked to answer some essay questions, which is new this year. If you have modifications or you require additional support for testing when it comes to writing, please just email me and let me know, and we'll work out an alternative for you. So, if you need modified help, extended time, any of those kind of modifications or accommodations for your testing. So don't hesitate. Just let me know. We can always work around that. But thank you guys. I really, really appreciate all of you. I'm happy that I have such a strong group of veterans to rely on, and I hope you guys have a wonderful season.